Hey guys, today's lesson is going to be all about how humans impact different ecosystems. A lot of this will be a review of stuff that we talked about in Bio 20, but a couple things will probably be new. Okay, so like I said, this is all about human impacts on different ecosystems. There we go. So we're going to be looking at the impacts of a bunch of different human activities on different ecosystems. We'll define a couple terms like biodiversity hotspot, keystone species, and indicator species. And then lastly, we're going to look at some difficulties with implementing different conservation practices. So obviously humans have a huge impact on ecosystems in a bunch of different ways. Those impacts could either be like direct, like going out and cutting down a tree, or indirect impacts on how different species function in that ecosystem. A lot of them are intentional, some of them are unintentional. So urban sprawl is one type of human impact. This refers to the fact that human civilizations are spreading out and taking up more and more space. So this really happens usually like around major cities. You see they just keep like growing outwards over time. Of course, that means that there's lots of habitat loss and stuff like that as that city grows and spreads out. In order to combat this, it would be ideal, as from an environmental standpoint, if all humans lived in like skyscrapers, like high-rise apartment buildings and stuff, so that our footprint of our buildings are much smaller. The fact that in Canada, at least, it's quite common for like all families to have their own individual home is really bad environmentally. It's great for us because humans don't like being super crammed together all the time. But environmentally, it would definitely be better if we were all in apartment buildings, stuff like that. And then also the fact is that the human population as a whole is just growing. So not only do we like to spread out into like the suburbs and stuff like that and have our own houses, but there is just more of us. So that also causes us to take up more space, use up more resources, whether that be like food or lumber or whatever, and also produce more waste. And that waste could be things like garbage, but it can also include things like pollution and emissions and stuff like that. Habitat fragmentation is another way that we negatively impact ecosystems around us. Habitat fragmentation is when the habitat of a species is broken up. So you can see in the top corner here an example of this, where this was once a giant forest, presumably, and then large areas have been cut out of this forest, which means that this once large habitat is now reduced into multiple smaller fragments. Also, it's not always something as major as like deforestation. Sometimes just building a road is going to be enough to cut that habitat in half. And sometimes species won't be able to cross the road, and other times crossing the road is just dangerous. In Ontario, we do have like bridges that go over some major highways that are like just animal crossings. That's all they are. They go from like one area of forest on one side of the highway, and then they're like, the bridge is actually just covered with like grass and shrubs and little bushes and stuff, and it will go to like the forest on the other side. And then there'll be like fences all along the side of the highway to kind of like funnel the animals towards that crossing as a way to try and reduce the impacts of the highway being fragmented, the highway fragmenting that ecosystem. But even that doesn't completely reduce that loss of habitat. Agriculture also has a massive impact on ecosystems. Obviously, in order to have farmland, you are converting some other type of ecosystem into that farmland. So that could be that you're like taking like a grassland field and turning it into a farmland. Or even worse, you could be like cutting down a forest to turn it into farmland, which is even more destructive. If you do the forest thing especially, you're going to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide being taken out of the air. They actually, I don't know if you guys know who Genghis Khan is, but he killed like millions or billions of people when he was like expanding his empire. He was like one of the Mongols. Anyway, they found that after he went and killed so many people, that so many farms were abandoned because the farmers were dead, and trees grew back on those farms, that there was like a noticeable like big drop off in atmospheric carbon dioxide following his kind of reign of terror. So I mean, I'm not condoning that at all, but I am saying, you know, less people is definitely good for the environment because of how we treat the environment. Not that I want anyone to die for that. And then agriculture also uses pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers and stuff like that that can contaminate the soil and aquatic environments. Animal waste can also go into aquatic environments. And we've talked about things that can cause, like algal blooms and, you know, too much nitrates poisoning animals and stuff like that. Also, just while we're on this topic, the whole like turning forest into farmland things, it's bad enough anywhere. It is really bad when it happens in the rainforest, because we may have talked about this before, but the rainforest has really poor soil quality. So what they do is they burn the trees down in that area to return some of the nutrients in the trees to the soil. But then that soil doesn't last very long. Like it's not good to farm in for very long, because the crops then take those nutrients out of the soil. So it's not very sustainable, and the rainforest has incredible amounts of biodiversity that you're losing when you do that, and also the amount of carbon dioxide taken in by the rainforest and its role in regulating the water cycle, all massively impacted by that. Forestry and dam building can also destroy the habitat. Unsustainable forestry practices where you just kind of deforest a massive area can decrease habitat and resources available to different populations in that area. It can also cause soil erosion, which then can be bad for the animals living in that area, but also the people living in that area that might not be able to farm anymore because all of the good soil got blown or washed away. That happened in Haiti, actually. They cut down like way too many trees and just like destroyed their soil. Anyway, and then dam building results in flooding of really large areas of land, which of course then turns that land-based ecosystem into an aquatic ecosystem, and the land-based animals then can't survive in that aquatic ecosystem. This, again, is especially bad when it happens in the rainforest. All of the like massive trees of the rainforest, when they decay, they actually turn the water acidic. So it's not even like a viable aquatic ecosystem that's formed. And on top of that, the acidity of the water tends to destroy the dams, which means that it's very unsustainable and you have to kind of like build a new dam every like decade or so. And then overexploitation is when you use too much of a plant or animal. So that could be you're like overhunting or overfishing or overharvesting in some sort of way that is unsustainable. So you're taking more out of that population than it can like regrow or replenish in that time period. So the populations will shrink over time. The majority of large mammal extinctions have happened because of overhunting by humans. So this is definitely a huge issue. And then climate change, industrialization, and kind of, you know, the building of like factories and the use of cars and all of that kind of stuff has massively increased the amount of greenhouse gases that are in our atmosphere. All of the mass production of goods that we love so much also causes a mass production of carbon dioxide and stuff like that. Burning fossil fuels is a big issue when it comes to adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, but so is farming livestock, like different ungulates, cows, that's sheep, that kind of stuff. Also just how much products we waste, especially when it comes to food waste. When we don't eat the food that is produced and we just throw it out, that food decomposes and releases greenhouse gases, and it's actually a huge issue. And then when you combine that with deforestation, meaning that less greenhouse gases get taken out of the air, obviously you have that buildup happening in the atmosphere. So that has resulted in climate change as Earth's radiation budget becomes unbalanced, essentially because the amount of thermal energy coming in is actually going down a little bit right now, but the amount going out has gone way down. So we're not losing as much thermal energy as we should be because it's getting trapped by the greenhouse gases, which is what is resulting in our warmer climate. Urban sprawl and deforestation also decrease Earth's albedo, which also means less thermal energy getting sent back out into space by being reflected and instead just staying here. Obviously, climate change has its impacts. It is natural for Earth to go through warming and cooling phases, but it's not natural for it to be happening this quickly. And because this warming period is happening so fast, many species aren't able to adapt fast enough to the new environment that they find themselves in. So because the species habitat and environment is being changed so quickly, many of them are going extinct. There have been 5 main mass extinctions in the past. Mass extinctions tend to follow a natural disaster of some sort, like either a major asteroid impact or some massive volcanic eruptions. Then there's also something called the Anthropocene extinction, also called the Holocene extinction, or the 6th mass extinction is currently taking place. Extinction is a natural process, but it is the rate of extinction that makes this a mass extinction. Right now, the extinction rate is about 1,000 times faster than the just kind of normal background extinction rate. By the way, if you're curious about other mass extinctions, there was like the one called the Great Dying, where it was like 96 or 98% of all animals on Earth died. I think 96%. And then there was also like the mass extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs. So there has been like some other like pretty cool mass extinctions in the past, but we're mainly concerned about the one that is currently happening. Okay, so conservation efforts are used to try and prevent the extinction of different threatened or endangered species. That includes efforts to decrease poaching and decrease overexploitation, as well as protect the habitat of those endangered species. So using different sustainable practices, reducing waste and pollution, putting in place different anti-poaching and anti-hunting laws, all of those fall under the umbrella of conservation. So does just educating the public about the importance of conservation and why we are trying to conserve these different species. Conservation efforts can be really expensive and time consuming, so it is important that we prioritize which species we're going to try and save or which populations or ecosystems we're going to try and protect, because we just can't protect all of them right now. So when it comes to prioritizing what areas or what species to try and protect, the first thing that we look at is keystone species. If we know a species is a keystone species, we want to protect it. So a keystone species are any species that if that species is removed from the ecosystem, the whole community will collapse. Essentially, that keystone species is really important to maintain the stability and the functioning of the ecosystem. Biodiversity hotspots are also prioritized. Those are any areas that have a really high concentration of biodiversity. So if you protect that hotspot area, you protect a lot of species at once. So you get a lot of like bang for your buck. So that would be like, you know, people are always talking about the rainforest. We have to protect the rainforest. And that's because the rainforest is a biodiversity hotspot. It has way more biodiversity on Earth than all other ecosystems or biomes combined. And then we also spend special time monitoring indicator species, which are species that tend to be the first sign that an ecosystem's in trouble. Indicator species are specialists and they have a super narrow set of requirements that need to be met in order for them to survive. And as soon as anything starts changing in their ecosystem, they start doing not so well. So they're kind of like an early warning system that something bad is happening in that ecosystem. If you guys have ever heard of like the canary in the coal mine, that's kind of like what the indicator species acts as. So the canary in the coal mine was like back when people used to go into coal mines all the time, they would bring a canary down there because the canary would die by being exposed to poisonous gases before the humans would die. And so if you saw that the canary just keeled over, you want to get out of the coal mine. It was like the warning sign that there's something not okay happening in the environment around us. So that's what the indicator species does. It indicates that there's something not okay going on. And if it keeps happening, it's going to start affecting other species in that ecosystem, not just the indicator species. Okay, so the first difficulty when it comes to conservation is money. Like I said, it can be expensive to put all of these different conservation practices into place. Lots of businesses, lots of big businesses lose money because of conservation efforts. When you're trying to tell businesses that they need to reduce pollution or stop destroying habitat or stop overexploiting that ecosystem, that's going to lose that business money, and big businesses don't like that. In places with really high poverty levels, some people also rely on overexploiting endangered species as a source of food or income. So, you know, you might say, no, you're not allowed to go kill those animals, but at the same time, if that, you know, community has nothing else to eat, that's like a hard sell. Some countries also just can't afford conservation. You know, like rhinos and elephants are major targets of poaching, and a lot of countries have put like task forces and like police officers and stuff together to go out and like protect those animals, but not all countries can afford to pay people to protect endangered species from poachers like that. And then, yeah, the problem with trying to raise money for conservation is that it's really hard if the species you're trying to conserve or protect isn't like cute and adorable. Like pandas are great, and society in the last couple of decades has done a great job of raising money to save the pandas. But uglier species have a harder time. Human-wildlife conflicts also make conservation difficult. So a human-wildlife conflict is any time where what's good for the humans and what's good for the wildlife are in direct conflict with each other. They don't match. So for instance, if you have an endangered species, but that endangered species is a threat to human lives or to their property, then the person's life is prioritized over that endangered species. Anytime you're trying to create protected areas of land for endangered populations, that means you're taking land away from people that might want to use that for agriculture or something. And then other times it might just be that we're using chemicals that are harmful to wildlife in order to protect humans or our crops. So DDT is a big example of that. DDT is not used in many countries anymore, but in countries that have really high death rates because of malaria, it is still used. DDT damages a lot of wildlife populations, especially endangered bird species. But it protects humans from malaria. So in countries where a lot of people die of malaria, it has been deemed that it's more important to protect human life than to protect the birds. Okay, that's it. I hope you found that interesting. Let me know if you have any questions.